Everybody, this is Steve Sabadsky, publisher of BayouBuzz.com. And today we're going to be talking Louisiana Legislature with Senator Conrad Appel. And I know there's an incredible special session going on, a fiscal session. And Senator Appel is going to talk to us and tell us what is going on. So, good morning.
Good morning.
So, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So we have a slight issue with the sound, and so that's why you're on the phone also with us. But everybody's going to be able to watch and listen. So I really do appreciate your taking your time being with us. So how has the last, say, 10 days or so been?
Well, it's been pretty wild. On the Senate side, we've just been treading water, waiting for some bills to come out of the House, which, as you know, last night did not happen. So from the Senate perspective, we haven't done much at all. We've just been waiting. Now, on the House side, it's a whole different animal, as you well know. So
Yeah.
perhaps you want to go there.
Sure. Well, yeah, we definitely want to talk about what you know in terms of the House, what's going on. Let me first start off and just say, how did we get into this budget mess that we're in, from your perspective?
Well, I have to tell you, it's not as bad as you might think. There have been fiscal cliffs throughout our history. It's only a fiscal cliff. That's a figment of the media. Truly, what we're facing is the end of some taxes that were temporary. And I'd like to talk about that for a moment.
Sure.
And then we're going to rebuild that tax structure in this session or in another session. But let me talk for a moment about those taxes.
Yeah, go ahead.
You've heard a lot about the promise, some kind of a promise that was made by the legislature to fix the long-term, permanent problems with our tax structure. Reform is a good word that's been kicked around a whole bunch. What this is all based upon was a task force that was created by the legislature a couple of years ago that was charged with two things. Number one, to come up with strategic plans, strategic changes for budget issues, that is spending. And number two, to look at the structure of our revenue raising measures, which are the fiscal measures, taxes. That task force very clearly did not look at the spending side. Every time I watched it throughout its whole process, every time they would come up with an issue related to spending, they would say, oh, well, we'll look at that later, or somebody else is looking at it, or something else. So they come out with a report, big fat report, basically filled with methods to raise revenue, taxes. So when we hear, as Republicans, when we hear people saying that we made some kind of a promise, that's not true. We expected a balanced report that we could use to create legislation that would address both the spending side and the revenue side. And what we got was an imbalanced report, heavily slanted toward revenue. So that debunks that issue from the Republican perspective. Now, what you saw in the House last night was a really interesting political charade. You end up with several groups of folks that have different agendas. The Republicans in the House thought they were dealing with the Democrats in a very constructive way. You might recall just a very few days ago, there was a Ways and Means Committee, and the Republicans let income tax measures out, as well as a sales tax measure, and passed some other issues. Now, the criteria for that was there was about 4 reform issues that the Republicans had said all along were mandatory to pass if we were going to pass revenue. One of those, the one that dealt with copays for Medicaid, was completely gutted in the Health and Welfare Committee in the House. So that was number one. It's gone for all practical purposes. And number two, yesterday on the floor, the House voted down one of the Speaker's bills, his main bill, which dealt with caps on the growth of our spending limits. So 2 of the 4, the other one was one of the other one was open checkbook, which did pass. But two of the four major points the Republicans had on their agenda were shot down before they even got to the starting gate. So suddenly then you had these groups in the legislature. The Republicans went to bat thinking that they had made a deal with the Democrats in the person of the governor and the Democratic delegation chairman, but not knowing that the Black Caucus apparently was had their nose out of kilter because they had not been involved in those discussions. And to some extent, I don't blame them for having their nose out of kilter if that's the case. So when the bills came on the floor, the Black Caucus voted in block, no, we're not going to pass these tax measures. And some very conservative Republicans voted no because they took it as an affront that the two of the four major reform bills were shot down by primarily the Democrats. So that's what you had last night. Humpty Dumpty is in pieces all over the ground. There are technical matters in which the session could continue and some of those bills could be resurrected, but we'll have to wait till, I guess, 3 o'clock this afternoon to see what the House leadership is going to do, if they can find enough votes to put Humpty Dumpty back together, or if we should go to the end of the session. In a second, I really would like to talk about that too, but in case you had any questions, I'll stop.
No, go ahead. I actually was going to ask that question.
Okay. It has been my belief and that of most of my peers that this was a misguided decision to have a special session prior to the revenue estimating conference and also to the regular session. We have gone into this special session with a demand to raise roughly $1 billion. We already knew, and until yesterday, the governor, when he finally acknowledged it, had been saying the $1 billion. But until yesterday, we found out that the governor now is acknowledging that there's $300 million in changes, primarily income tax changes resulting from federal tax law. That $300 million is applied to the 900 shortfall. And so we're really dealing with a $700 million shortfall, not a $1 billion shortfall. We also need that revenue estimating conference to look at the price of oil. We needed to look at additional other income the state has garnered as a result of President Trump's changes in the economy. The economy's ticked up. Everybody knows that, which means our tax receipts should have gone up. Income taxes, all the other taxes related to corporations and so forth. So we need the revenue estimating conference to tell us how much money we have. And then finally, we really should have the legislature do the appropriations process and determine how much the legislature wants to spend. Then and only then should we have had a special session. It could have been very brief to pick up what the shortfall was after those two issues had taken place, the revenue estimating conference and the appropriations process. And we could have had a very clean system moving forward, everything funded properly. Instead, we were handed a demand for $1 billion when we had no idea if $1 billion is the right number, close to the right number. We already know it's not. So there was a lot of distrust. It's the first day of the special session. Why are we here? What are we looking for? What are we trying to accomplish? You know, this was not a happy place for the last 2 weeks.
Right. So when would this other session take place? In June?
Well, you can do it two ways. You can do it concurrent with the regular session. We can recess, gavel into a special session for, say, 10 days, and then come back into regular session and pass the HB1, which is the appropriations bill. Or we could wait till the end of, we could do the budgeting process, but not formally fund HB1, go into special session immediately after the close of the regular session, and then, a week or so, pass the necessary tax measures to fully fund the government. It's only a slight difference in time, either way. And then one other point I wanted to make, you heard a lot from people saying, oh, we've got to have a special session now because we've got to be able to plan for our future.
Right.
I don't buy that argument, because nobody in any form of government, whether it be a policy that needs to be funded, a program, or an agency knows how much money they're going to get until HB1, which is the appropriations bill, is actually signed by the governor sometime, usually in June. In any case. So, I mean, how many times have we gone into the appropriations process and seen agencies cut? So I don't buy this argument that we had to have a special session to raise $1 billion just because they needed to plan. They know good and well that nothing is firm or fixed until HB1 is signed by that governor, and that's usually in June sometime. So
and I would assume that the universities would disagree. I'm assuming that they would say, no, we definitely need, I mean, you know, every year, yeah, the governor goes ahead and he will appropriate or veto, but, you know, for our purpose, we really need a couple of months, and the parents too.
But here's the problem with that
assuming they
argument.
said that.
That is exactly the argument, but here's the problem with it. Let's just take this scenario that we passed $1 billion. That doesn't mean anybody's getting that money. For all we know, the governor may lobby the legislature through the appropriations process to push most of that money toward health care, for instance. I'm not putting words in his mouth, but it's theoretically possible. You don't know what TOPS is going to be funded at. You don't know what the universities. I mean, you can make an assumption, and I think that's a fair point, that you can make an assumption what it's going to be funded at. But how many times in the last 10 years that I've been here have we seen where we go into negotiations on HB1 and everything changes the last day of session? So I don't buy that argument. I think this was all an effort to try to get the legislature to raise a substantial amount of money before the REC meets, in the hopes that perhaps the REC would recognize additional revenue that would allow us to grow the government even further. That's kind of my suspicion. But nevertheless, we have to wait and see if this special session collapses this afternoon. I may get my wish, because we'll go into regular session, we'll do the regular process, and we will end up with a special session at that end or concurrent, just the way I suggested it should have been done in the first place. So we'll see.
Have we ever done that before in terms of suspending the regular session and then start a special session and end that? And then I don't remember that. I'm not saying that it hasn't been done.
No, in my career it has not been done. However, we did do some research last year with the Attorney General, and we found that it could be done. So we have two options. One is a suspension, as you point out, and do a concurrent special, or finish the regular, go into a special, and finish the votes at that point. Either way, we end up before the July 1st deadline for having a balanced budget. The state will be funded, and we'll move forward.
Okay. Now, obviously, the Democrats don't want to have another penny sales tax. They don't want. Is there any chance of just extending that for 2 years, 3 years?
Well, I think that was the bill yesterday that collapsed. It was for a 1/4-cent sales tax,
right,
and it had a 3-year extension. There was a lot of arguments made that it should be made permanent, which I perfectly agree with. I think all we had to do is eliminate the clause relating to the 3-year extension and make it permanent, and all those discussion points would have gone away. I would have no problem with that. I am not one that thinks that we can find $80 million in cuts. There's no way. However, I do think there might be some cuts. So to my way of thinking, we should have had a balanced approach, and this could have been done very simply. You would have had the $302 million that we're going to recognize eventually in additional revenues, which are income taxes, by the way. So we're already raising income taxes on the people by $302 million. Then you could have had some sales tax, some cleaning of pennies together, which might have raised another $300 to $400 million. And then you might have found 100 or 200 million of adjustments or cuts or reforms to make up the difference. It would have been a very easy, painless way to do this. Instead, the governor chose to push forward with the demand for $1 billion in revenue, now reduced. He has finally acknowledged that it's really not $1 billion. It's around $700 million.
No,
you can draw your own conclusions why he did that, but he did it.
Yeah.
So
we kind of knew that a few weeks ago, that because of the change in the tax law, that there would be an income tax adjustment.
We did. Everyone knew it, but if you look at the governor's rhetoric and his supporters' rhetoric, it's always been 994 or 996 million they needed. If you look at the letter that was put out by the Black Caucus from the Senate, it was $1,045 million that they needed. But everybody always knew there was at least 302 million that REC would recognize, and that's why I was a little bit disingenuous. I guess that's a sexy point to be making when you're trying to sell taxes, how much money we need, but in truth it wasn't that much, and it could have been fixed very easily, just as you point out, with a nominal amount of sales tax, make it permanent, and go to the REC and see, because we also know through the REC process back in December that they recognized $244 million in additional state revenues independent of the Trump tax changes. That could be a greater number too. We won't know until March. We will not know how much money the state needs until after the REC meets in March and after the legislature meets and prepares the appropriations budget.
Just out of curiosity, do you know whether or not whether the governor agrees that you can have this simultaneous special session, meaning that you can suspend the general session, a simultaneous legislative session, suspend the general session, go with the special? I know that you said the Attorney General believes that's the case, but do you know whether or not the governor bought into that legal determination?
No, that we haven't gone that far.
Okay.
There's been no discussions with the administration, or actually, this was something that the Senate investigated. Some of my peers investigated last year. I'm not sure the House would agree either, but we believe on our side that is a possibility. So it gives us two options. Even if there's some conflict over the point of having a concurrent special session, we could certainly just move into a session ending special session, a lot of words, and do it in a short period of time, and you'd have a whole lot more confidence on the part of the legislature, because we'd know how much money we need at that point, instead of just asking for the moon and hoping to settle for something in between. We could actually have a special session based on the actual amount of money we need, and there would be a whole lot more confidence. And so I think it would be a very simple thing to do.
Okay, but we've never done it before. I mean, we were short, and Governor Jindal called special session too in the beginning of the prior to the session. Am I correct? That's kind of just the way that things have gone. And you're saying, well, but that's really not. I mean, I agree. You're not going to get a real solid figure until the very end. I mean, that makes a lot of sense.
And that caused so much distrust just starting this special session. It's been done. It's been done in Romer's time. It's been done in Foster's time. There's been a number of times. This idea of a fiscal cliff is really just something sexy for the newspapers to write about. It's just it's really the process. I mean, you could say we've had a fiscal cliff in every session I've sat through for 10 years. It's the process. We always do different, appropriations methods to fulfill the budgetary requirements of the state, and that's how it works. Am I excited about doing a 3-year sales tax? Not particularly, but I don't see it as the end of the world. I don't like it because it does cause some unhappiness with the bond rating folks, and I would prefer not to do that. But it's not the end of the world. The state continues, and we're going to pay our bills, so it's a good thing. But we'll see. We'll see if anything at all comes out of this session. Right now, it's it's up in the air whether we're going to continue after today anyway.
Right. Is today the drop dead date? In terms
No,
of the
no, no.
House?
We have time. If somehow the Speaker and the different warring factions in the House could get together and agree on something, there's still plenty of time for the Senate to do its stuff and have conference committees and so forth. We might have to work on Saturday and Sunday, but we could certainly do it. But if they find that there's no way to get the votes, it's probably foolish to continue, because if there's not going to be any movement on any parties, why spend the state's money? I think it'd be a waste of funds.
Okay. I read something somewhere on the internet. I don't want to put you in a hot seat, but they mentioned you as a possible candidate for governor. Any interest?
Oh, I'm not really interested in running for governor. I'm more interested in, you know what my interest is? I'm going to tell you what my interest is. I ran as a business person. I want to finish my term and go back to work. But before I leave, what I would like to see is someone or some group of folks express a vision for what Louisiana could be, should be, and then move in the direction of achieving that vision. One of my great fears is that currently you hear nothing about where Louisiana is going. I mean, under this administration, we've had really three issues. Number one issue was the unilateral acceptance of Medicaid expansion, which may be very laudable for the perspective of healthcare, but has every opportunity to bankrupt this state in the next few years. I mean, the money is growing and growing and growing. So it's kind of funny. We talk around here about today's fiscal cliff and then next year's and the year after, because of the Medicaid expansion and the other costs of healthcare. There is no end in demand for money. So you'll have a fiscal cliff next year and the year after and the year after. That's number one. Number two, we had the justice reform. That was you could argue whether that's going to be successful or not. Clearly, it was not done in the same model as Texas, which in a state in which it was successful, because Texas invested about $250 million in pre-release programs before they started releasing folks. We just released them, and we hope we can find some money to do pre-release programs. So that's number two. And number three has been money, just the growth of the budget. If you look at Jindal's last budget, and then you look at the current budget, and you make a simple subtraction on the state portion only, you'll see that we've grown about $1.1 billion in 2 years. So therein lies your fiscal cliff. I mean, when you're spending $1 billion more than you were 2 years ago, and you have $1 billion shortfall, it's pretty clear where the money went. So, but there's nothing else.
Yeah,
we're here. Nothing else from. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's nothing else coming out of the administration. We're hearing nothing on education, nothing on infrastructure, economic development. I mean, in the last 2 days, major national groups have rated Louisiana dead last. Mm-hmm. And the governor's reaction is, that's not true. We're not that bad. We're not that bad. Well, let me tell you something. Perception is fact. And when U.S. News and World Report sends out 1 million copies of its magazine, it says Louisiana is dead last in everything, people believe it. And you know what they do? They don't come here. Businesses, corporations, they buy that. I mean, we have the absolute worst civil justice system in America, and yet you get no movement on tort reform. We have a tax structure. If you look at the amount of revenue derived from the personal side versus the corporate side, it's almost entirely corporate side, heavily slanted corporate side. And you can go down the list, one after another, messages being sent to America that don't bring your companies to Louisiana because you're going to be sued or you're going to be taxed to death. or you're going to have politicians picking your pocket for campaign contributions or whatever. So my goal in my life is to try to change some of that perception, to try to find a way to get us out of this wilderness that we're in. I'll speak out wherever and whenever I can. And then like MacArthur, old soldiers never die, they kind of fade away. Well, that's my plan. So that answers your question.
Right, right. And one of the things that I know that it's difficult for a businessman to maintain the momentum in their business, you know, when they spend half of their life, you know, fixing the state's problems.
It's extraordinarily difficult. My business has suffered beyond belief since I've been here, but that was my decision and my choice, and I'm happy with my choices.
Absolutely.
I felt like I had an obligation to do what I could do to help the people of Louisiana, because Louisiana's been good to me and my family. So that's just the way I was raised. Yeah.
Well, we thank you. You're actually my state senator, so you know, certainly appreciate your efforts. You know, and really, let's just hope that we're able to solve this fiscal issue, whether it's a cliff or not cliff or whatever. You know, we just need some kind of resolution, and we need to.
Well, I feel very comfortable that we're a long way from the end of the legislative cycle. We've got months and months and months. I have no fear at all that the state of Louisiana is not going to collapse. The higher education system is not going to be underfunded. We're going to probably fund TOPS fully. Healthcare will be funded. It's just the process.
Sure.
And we'll get there. I don't like the way it was set up going into it, but at the end of the day, we're going to make it work.
Okay, so what I'm going to do to make this work is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to click on some buttons to turn off the transmission, the juice. And listen, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. So
okay, buddy.
If you could just stay right there and just hit some buttons for the crowd. We're going to put this up on Bayou Buzz. We'll have it edited and transcribed, and so for the world to be able to read. And so, thank you so much. Let me just hit some buttons.